Movie reviews. A Quiet Place Part 2 back in the theaters. This movie is blowing up the box office. I think movies are back. I think they're officially back. I know several times throughout this past year we had the thought with Tenet, the Christmas season, even earlier, 2021. But this movie is actually making money at the box office. It's a thing. So as you can tell from the title of this movie, it's the sequel to the 2018 film A Quiet Place. This was supposed to come out last March 2020. It got delayed. This was one of the first movies that got really pushed back. And so it's finally here. It's here, and let's talk about it. It's once again directed by John Krasinski, starring his wife Emily Blunt. Now, John Krasinski is in this movie for a little bit, even though, spoilers, he dies in the first one. But this one kind of gives a little bit to the insight of how this whole situation begun. So we do see a little bit of a prequel element to it. But then for most of the movie, he's not in it. So it does just star Emily Blunt. And also Cillian Murphy, who is someone that fits so well into this universe. I don't know if I would have, picked this out, but seeing him in this film, it just fits perfectly. The other kids are in it as well. Millicent Simmonds, who plays the daughter. She is incredible in this movie. She was incredible in the first one. So she is actually deaf in real life and plays a deaf character in this movie, which actually serves really helpful to the plot because the whole family already knows ASL. So in a movie, in a universe where you're supposed to be quiet, they can just use sign language. So that kind of conveniently works for the plot, but she nevertheless is fantastic in both of these films. Also stars Noah Jupe again as the son, and Djimon Hounsou, who is a new character in this movie. So I did happen to see this in theaters. It will be on Paramount Plus 45 days after the release, which by the time I'm releasing this video, it's a couple weeks after, so it shouldn't be long at all. But I would highly recommend seeing this in theaters. Part of it is mostly just the sound design. It is so brilliantly done. This premise is so original. Well, I guess it's not original because it's a sequel. The original movie was an original premise, but this one is still original because it's the same people who came up with that premise. But the sound design is so brilliant. In a universe where you have to be quiet, otherwise these monsters are going to literally kill you. Silence is huge. And there's nothing more terrifying than just a silent movie theater. But even beyond the silence, a lot of this movie's plot is based around frequency. If you remember at the end of the first movie, the daughter realizes that her hearing aid, while put up next to a microphone, the frequencies are so loud that the monsters can't handle it. They pretty much get destroyed from it. So this movie utilizes that a lot. And so I would highly recommend, if you don't see this in theaters, see this with good speakers. But part of what makes this movie so fun, beyond the plot, beyond the acting, is just the thrilling element of it. And I think John Krasinski does a brilliant job directing this movie and making it feel so thrilling. You don't always realize how much noise you make throughout the day, and I think this movie really emphasizes that. If you had to be quiet, I think we would all die. When getting into the plot of this movie, it's interesting, because I think you have to get into the whole sequel discussion of what is the point of a sequel, and how does a sequel become good. And I think this movie does as good as a job you possibly can while having a film that most people enjoy. We get a larger picture of this universe. We get a glimpse of where these monsters come. Not a huge one, but just a little taste. And we also meet other characters and people living in this world, because in the first one, really all we saw was the single family. And so it's great. I love it. However, I think there should have been more of it in this movie. What I mean is this. I said there's this opening prequel scene of how these monsters came to Earth, but it's very small. It's more so to set up the stakes and see how this whole disaster happened, and we're following the characters trying to rush out of the town. You kind of find out where these monsters come from, but really you have still no idea. And I'm not saying they had to spell it all out for us, but I think as far as our understanding of this universe, we really don't know that much more than the first one. Like I said, we are introduced to new people, but the conversation around them, or the idea of what their intentions are still mysterious. There are some people that are bad, and even Cillian Murphy's character kind of hints at that, as these people aren't worth saving. That was a huge part of the marketing. and then we don't really see anything with those people. We meet them, we interact with them, and then we move on. And I think that's my biggest problem with this being a sequel, is they do all the things a sequel should do, they just don't execute it to the level that I want them to do it. And so maybe that's my fault for having these expectations. I just think there could have been more done in this film. As of now, there's no official confirmation that third one is happening, but I guarantee it will, because that's the only reason they would have left this stuff out. I think the first one is a very nice, self-contained story. It wraps up nicely. We didn't really need this sequel, but since the sequel is here, you might as well make something with it. And I just don't think they used the full potential. I think the reason that they didn't kind of use all their tricks in this one is because they want to wait for the third one. And so it's hard to judge this movie as a standalone film, because it definitely feels a part of something bigger. Because if I were to watch this movie on my own, it wouldn't be the best. Honestly, I think I would have enjoyed this movie a lot more if it would have just ended with a to be continued, because the way that this movie kind of leaves you hanging, it's not like a cliffhanger, because it does wrap up this story, but this story is not even large enough. It feels just like little adventures that this entire family is taking together, trying to get to one point to the next. And at least in the first movie, it felt like there was a definitive ending. Like, okay, this is the end of this specific story. But this one feels like an episode of television rather than a feature film. It's also kind of short, and I think I kind of like that. It was really refreshing to be like, oh, that's done. Like, there's no point that drags. It's always straight to the point. You kind of just get right into it. It's sitting at 97 minutes, and honestly, compared to a lot of other movies I've seen lately that go way too long, this was a breath of fresh air. But I can't emphasize enough that the acting is incredible. Emily Blunt is just such a talent. She continues to deliver time and time again, and she continues to do so in this movie. A lot of the action sequence, or I should say thrilling sequences, are really interestingly done too. There's at one point where there's 3 different stories happening all simultaneously. So it's like 3 different characters in different locations, but we are cutting between each story, and it's so well done. And there's a lot of similar things happening at the same time. So like, there'll be fire in this story, and then the camera will transition into the fire happening in this story, and somehow it relates to the other one. And it is so all tied together so nicely. I just think John Krasinski is an amazing director. Which, to be completely honest, I think it's a little bummer that he isn't directing more films. I mean, the last one he did was A Quiet Place, and we need to just see more of him. We need to see more of his work. He's a very talented actor, but his direction is just incredible to watch in these films. So is it a perfect movie? No, not at all. But it is a fun time, and I guarantee you will be entertained while watching this. So I'm going to wind up giving this 4 out of 5 stars if you follow me on Letterboxd, and you should. So that's A Quiet Place Part 2. Have you seen it? What do you think? Comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I will see you next time.